Shalom, shalom. Welcome, welcome, world changers. Another night of reading the scriptures. And that was beautiful music. Hannah, thank you for doing that. Thank you for giving us live piano music every single night. That was awesome. Um, yes, so hey, if you enjoy Hannah's music, let her know in the live chat. I'm sure she'd appreciate it. Okay, so what we're going to do tonight is we're going to read Second Maccabees chapter 5 through 8. There are there's I think it was 15 chapters to Second Maccabees, so it's going to take us a few days to get through this. After that, First Maccabees, and I'm thinking probably after that, Four Maccabees. Now, the reason why we're doing it kind of weird order is because I don't know who or why they numbered it as first, second, and third Maccabees when the first one is actually the last one, and the third one is actually the first one, chronologically speaking. So um, it's kind of weird. So again, we're trying to kind of do this in a loosely chronological order, and we've got several other apocryphal books to read as well before we dive into the New Testament. And also, just to give you guys a little bit of a heads up, I know some of you guys know this already, but August 7th, this will be Sunday, August 7th. We will be blessed, Lord willing, with a special guest, Dr. James Tabor, a Bible scholar and archaeologist. He's got an amazing line of books that he wrote, and he's got an amazing wealth of knowledge. And so we're going to have him with us. That is Sunday, August 7th at 1 p.m. Okay, that's a little bit off what we usually do, but I know sometimes it's been a couple times already so far when we have special guests. Sometimes we do Sunday at 1 p.m. So this is what we're doing. Dr. James Tabor is going to be with us Sunday, August 7th at 1 p.m. Make sure you mark your calendar and make sure you join. Make sure you let your Christian friends and family members know about this as well. So really looking forward to it. It's going to be very exciting. And Lord willing, we're going to have a lot of other guests as well. That's going to really enrich our knowledge and our relationship with God, knowledge of the scriptures, and so on and so forth. So awesome. Yeah. So before we get into Second Maccabees, as always, I'm going to just dive into the live chat here, see what we have. Calamentos says, Shalom, everyone. Shalom, Calamentos. Vinny says, Shalom, everyone. Shalom, Vinny. Psalm 94 says, Shalom, everyone. Shalom, Psalm 94. Billy says, Shalom. Shalom, Billy. Good to see you. Great Deception says, Shalom, everyone. Shalom, Alan. Good to see you, brother. Vinny says, yes, thank you, Hannah. That was beautiful. Yes, I agree. All right. Well, awesome. Corey says, Shalom, Chris. Shalom, Corey. Good to see you. Welcome. Okay, so let's dive right in this. This is Second Maccabees, chapter 5 through 8. And I will be checking the live chat, especially afterwards, perhaps during the reading. It depends on how it goes. And so if you have, just a second here. If you have any specific questions for me, if the live chat, sometimes we have the live chat's very, very lively, okay? And if that's the case, just put at Christopher Enoch in there. And so that way I know that you're asking me specifically as opposed to the group. All right, let's do this. Second Maccabees chapter 5. Now, about this time, Antiochus made his second invasion into Egypt. It happened that throughout all the city, for almost 40 days, cavalry appeared in the midst of the sky in swift motion, wearing robes woven with gold and carrying spears, equipped with troops for battle, drawing swords, squadrons of cavalry in array, encounters and pursuits of both armies, shaking shields, multitudes of lances, throwing of missiles, flashings of golden trappings, and putting on all sorts of armor. Therefore, everyone prayed that the manifestation might have been given for good. When a false rumor had arisen that Antiochus was dead, Jason took not less than 1,000 men and suddenly made an assault upon the city. When those who were on the wall were being routed, and the city was at length nearly taken, Menelaus took refuge in the citadel. But Jason slaughtered his own citizens without mercy, not considering the good success against kinsmen it is his greatest misfortune, but supposing himself to be setting up trophies over enemies and not over fellow countrymen. He didn't win control of the government, but receiving shame as the result of his conspiracy, he fled again as a fugitive into the country of the Ammonites. At last, therefore, he met with a miserable end, having been imprisoned at the court of Aretas, the prince of the Arabians, fleeing from city to city, pursued by all men, hated as a rebel against the laws, and abhorred as the executioner of his country and his fellow citizens. He was cast ashore into Egypt. He who had driven many from their own country into exile perished in exile, having crossed the sea to the Laced- Lacedaemonians, hoping to find shelter there because they were near of kin. He who had thrown out a multitude unburied had none to mourn for him. He didn't have any funeral at all and no place in the tomb of his ancestors. Interesting. We read this a lot, especially, I'm not sure how many of you, I know a few of you were, but I'm not sure how many of you joined us when we were reading, especially the Legends of the Jews there several months ago. Very, very interesting. It's a recurring theme. When you basically God gives you what you deserve, so to speak. You get it back. You give and you receive. And so, unless you repent, unless you find forgiveness and mercy with God, you will reap what you've sown. Verse 11. Now, when the news came to the king concerning that which was done, he thought that Judea was in revolt. So, setting out from Egypt in a rage, he took the city by force of weapons and commanded his soldiers to cut down without mercy those who came in their way and to kill those who went into their houses. Then there was killing of young and old, destruction of boys, women, and children, and slaying of virgins and infants. In a total of 3 days, 80,000 were destroyed, of which 40,000 were slain in close combat, and no fewer were sold into slavery than slain. Not content with this, he presumed to enter into the most holy temple of all the earth, having Menelaus for his guide, who had proved himself a traitor both to the laws and to his country, even taking the sacred vessels with his polluted hands, and dragging down his profane hands the offerings that had been dedicated by other kings to enhance the glory and honor of the place. Antiochus was lifted up in mind, not seeing that because of the sins of those who lived in the city, the sovereign Lord had been provoked to anger a little while, and therefore his eye was turned away from the place. But had it not been so that they were already bound by many sins, this man, even as Heliodorus, who was sent by King Seleucus to view the treasury, would, as soon as he came forward, have been scourged and turned back from his daring deed. However, the Lord didn't choose the nation for the place's sake, for the but the place for the nation's sake. Very interesting the way it's put there. Verse 20. Therefore, also The place itself, having shared in the calamities that happened to the nation, did afterward share in its benefits. And the place which was forsaken in the wrath of the Almighty was, at the reconciliation of the great sovereign, restored again with all glory. For Antiochus, when he had carried away out of the temple 1,800 talents, he hurried away to Antioch, thinking in his arrogance that he could sail on land and walk on sea, because his heart was lifted up. In other words, he was arrogant, he was proud. Moreover, he left governors to afflict the race at Jerusalem: Philip, by race a Phrygian, and in character more barbarous than him who set him there, and at Gerizim, Andronicus, and besides these, Menelaus, who's worse, who worse than all the rest, exalted himself against his fellow citizens, having a malicious mind toward the Jews, whom he had made his citizens. He sent that lord of pollutions, Apollonius, with an army of 22,000, commanding him to kill all those who were full of rage, and to sell the women and the boys as slaves. He came to Jerusalem, and pretending to be a man of peace, waited till the holy day of the Sabbath, and finding the Jews at rest from work, he commanded his men to parade fully armed. He put to the sword all those who came out to the spectacle. Running into the city with the armed men, he killed great multitudes. But Judas, who is also called Maccabees, with about 9 others, withdrew himself, and with his company kept himself alive in the mountains kept himself alive in the mountains like animals do. They continued feeding on what grew wild, that they might not be partakers of the defilement. Can you imagine if Christians were like that, if they went to that extent of not being defiled by the world? Chapter 6. Not long after this, the king sent out an old man of Athens, to compel the Jews to depart from the laws of their fathers and not to live by the laws of God, and also to pollute the sanctuary in Jerusalem and to call it by the name of Olympian Zeus, and to call the sanctuary in Gerizim by the name of Zeus, the protector of foreigners, even as the people who lived in that place did. The visitation of this evil was harsh and utterly grievous, for the temple was filled with debauchery and reveling by the heathen, who dallied with prostitutes and had intercourse with women within the sacred precincts, and moreover brought inside things that were not appropriate. The altar was filled with those abominable things which had been prohibited by the laws. A man could neither keep Sabbath nor observe the feasts of their ancestors, nor so much as confess himself to be a Jew. On the day of the king's birth every month, they were led along with bitter constraint to eat of the sacrifices. When the feast of Dionysia came, they were compelled to go in procession in honor of Dionysus, wearing wreaths of ivy. A decree went out to the neighboring Greek cities by the suggestion of Ptolemy that they should observe the same conduct against the Jews, and should make them eat of the sacrifices, and that they should kill those who didn't choose to go over to the Greek rites. So the present misery was for all to see. For example, 2 women were brought in for having circumcised their children. These, when they had led them publicly around the city with the babes hung from the breasts, they threw down headlong from the wall. Others, who had run together into the caves nearby to keep the 7th day secretly, were betrayed to Philip and were all burned together because their piety kept them from defending themselves in view of the honor that of the most solemn day. I urge those who read this book to not be discouraged because of the calamities, but recognize that these punishments were not for the destruction, but for the chastening of our race. For indeed it is a sign of great kindness that those who act impiously are not let alone for a long time, but immediately met with retribution. For in the case of the other nations, the sovereign Lord waits patiently to punish them until they have attained to the full measure of their sins, but not with us, that he might not take vengeance on us afterward when we have come to the height of our sins. Therefore, he never withdraws his mercy from us, but though he chastens with calamity, he doesn't forsake his own people. However, let this that we have spoken suffice to remind you. But after a few words, we must come to the narrative. Eleazar, one of the principal scribes, a man already well advanced in years and of noble countenance, was compelled to open his mouth to eat man's flesh. But he, welcoming death with honor rather than life with defilement, advanced of his own accord to the instrument of torture, but first spat out the flesh, as men ought to come who are resolute to repel such things as not even for the natural love of life is it lawful to taste. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? Let me just stop here for just a second. That you have record of people who were willing not just to die, but to be brutally tortured just because they would not eat pork. So they would rather be brutally tortured than to eat pork, than to defile themselves by breaking the Torah in regards to the dietary laws of God. Can you imagine if Christians were like that today? Can you imagine if Christians were like that today? They say, I would rather be tortured mercilessly than to eat something I shouldn't eat according to the Torah. Wow, it's amazing. Verse 21, but those who had the charge of that forbidden sacrificial feast, so apparently they were sacrificing pigs, took that man aside for the acquaintance which of old times they had with him, and privately implored him to bring flesh of his own providing, such as was proper for him to use, and to make as if he did eat of the flesh of the sacrifice, as had been commanded by the king. So let me stop there again. So what does this mean? This means they tried to convince him, instead of being brutally tortured upon these horrible instruments of torture and to his death, that he would pretend to eat pork. But instead of eating pork, he would eat kosher food. But he would pretend, he would make it look like it was pork. Okay, that's what it means. That by doing so, this is verse 22, he might be delivered from death, and so his ancient friendship with them might be treated kindly. But he, this is amazing, but he, having formed a high resolve, and one that became his years, the dignity of old age, and the gray hairs which he had reached with honor, and his excellent education from a child. Okay, so some authorities read manner of life, his excellent manner of life, or education from a child, or rather the holy laws, legislation of God's ordaining, declared his mind accordingly, bidding them to quickly send him to Hades. So, in other words, again, this man would not even pretend that it was pork. He did not even want people to think that he was eating pork. He would rather die a horrible death through horrible instruments of torture than for someone to be deceived into thinking that he ate pork, but he really didn't eat pork. So they're trying to rescue his life. They're trying to rescue him uh, by getting him to kind of deceive people to think that he's eating pork, but he's not. He's saying, no, not even. I'm not even going to. I don't even want people to think that I'm eating pork. I don't want anybody to think that I'm eating pork. I'd rather die. Send me to Hades. In other words, to the grave first. Verse 24. For it doesn't become our years to dissemble, he said, that many of the young should suppose that Eliezer, the man of 90 years, had gone over to an alien religion. And so they, by reason of my deception, and for the sake of his brief and momentary life, would be led astray because of me, and I defile and disgrace myself in my old age. For even if for the present time, I would remove from me the punishment of men, yet whether I live or die, I wouldn't escape the hands of the Almighty. Therefore, by bravely parting with my life now, I will show myself worthy of my old age and leave behind, in Greek, one that has left behind a noble example to the young to die willingly and nobly, a glorious death for the revered and holy laws. When he had said these words, he went immediately to the instrument of torture. The Greek text of this verse is uncertain. Okay, this will be the next verse. When they changed the goodwill they bore toward him a little before into ill will, because these words of his were, as they thought, sheer madness. And when he was at the point to die with the blows, he groaned aloud and said, to the Lord, who has the holy knowledge, it is manifest that while I might have been delivered from death, I endure severe pains in my body by being scourged. But in soul I gladly suffer these things because of my fear of him. So this man also died like this, leaving his death for an example of nobleness and a memorial of virtue, not only to the young, but also to the great body of his nation. Wow, it's amazing. 2 Maccabees chapter 7, it came to pass that 7 brothers and their mother were at the king's command taken and shamefully handled with scourges and cords to compel them to taste of the abominable swine's flesh. Okay, just a little bit of spoiler here. 4 Maccabees includes these stories in it. Okay, what we just read in this as well, it includes it in it. So we're kind of reading a little bit of 4 Maccabees ahead of time. I know some of you heard me say this yesterday, but 4 Maccabees is one of my favorite books. It's my favorite because of the lessons that are spelt out within it, and so we'll get to that. But just to kind of let you guys know, a little bit of a heads up. What we're reading now is in 4 Maccabees, but 4 Maccabees frames it in a different way. So it came to pass that 7 brothers with their mother were at the king's command taken and shamefully handled with scourges and cords to compel them to taste of the abominable swine's flesh. One of them made himself the spokesman and said, What would you ask and learn from us? For we are ready to die rather than to transgress the laws of our ancestors. Wow. Again, this is amazing. Don't you wish more people were like this? The king fell into a rage and commanded that pans and cauldrons be heated. When these were immediately heated, he gave orders to cut out the tongue of him who had been their spokesman, and to scalp him, and to cut off his extremities, with the rest of his brothers and his mother looking on. In other words, right in front of everybody. And when he was utterly maimed, the king gave orders to bring him to the fire, being yet alive, and to fry him in the pan. Can you imagine? As the smoke from the pan spread far, they and their mother also exhorted one another to die nobly, saying this, quote, "The Lord God sees, and in truth is entreated for us, as Moses declared in his song, which witnesses against the people to their faces, saying, and he will have compassion on his servants." Unquote. And when the first died like this, they brought the second mocking, and they pulled off the skin of his head with the hair, and asked him, "Will you eat before your body is punished in every limb?" So look at what they were doing. Look at where they just want these people to eat pork. But these people were so dedicated to the Torah, they were willing to endure all this. What amazement. It's an amazing thing. Verse 8, but he answered in the language of his ancestors and said to them, "No." Therefore, he also underwent the next torture in succession as the first had done. When he was at the last gasp, he said, "You, miscreant, release us out of this present life, but the King of the world will raise us who have died for his laws up to everlasting renewal of life." After him, the third was made a victim of their mocking. When he required, he quickly put out his tongue and stretched out his hands courageously and nobly said, "I got these from heaven. For his law's sake, I treat these with contempt. From him, I hope to receive these back again." As a result, the king himself and those who were with him were astonished at the young man's soul, for he regarded the pains as nothing. When he too was dead, they shamefully handled and tortured the fourth in the same way. Being near to death, he said this, "It is good to die at the hands of men, and look for the hope which was given by God, that we will be raised up again by him. For as for you, you will have no resurrection to life." Next after him, they brought the fifth and shamefully handled him. But he looked toward the king, or in the Greek, him, and said, "Because you have authority among men, though you are corruptible, you do what you please. But don't think that our race has been forsaken by God. But hold on to your ways and see how this sovereign majesty will torture you and your descendants." After they brought the sixth, when he was about to die, he said, "Don't be vainly deceived, for we suffer these things for our own doings, as sinning against our own God. Astounding things have come to pass, but don't think you that you will be unpunished, having tried to fight against God." But above all, the mother was marvelous and worthy of honorable memory. For when she watched 7 sons perishing Within the space of one day, she bore the sight with a good courage because of her hope in the Lord. She exhorted each one of them in the language of their fathers, filled with a noble spirit and stirring up her woman's thoughts with manly courage, saying to them, I don't know how you came into my womb. It wasn't I who gave you your spirit and your life, your breath or your life. It wasn't I who brought into order the first elements of each one of you. Therefore, the creator of the world, who shaped the first origin of man and devised the first origin of all things, in mercy gives back to you again both your spirit and your life, as you now treat yourselves with contempt for his law's sake. But Antiochus, thinking himself to be despised, and suspecting the reproachful voice while the youngest was yet alive, didn't only make his appeal to him by words, but also at the same time promised with oaths that he would enrich him and raise him to high honor if he would turn from the ways of his ancestors, and that he would take him for his friend and entrust him with public affairs. But when the young man would in no way listen, the king called to him his mother and urged her to advise the youth to save himself. When he had urged her with many words, she undertook to persuade her son, but bending toward him, laughing the cruel tyrant to scorn, she spoke this in the language of her fathers, quote, My son, have pity upon me, who carried you 9 months in my womb, and nursed you 3 years, and nourished and brought you up to this age, and sustained you. I beg you, my child, to lift your eyes to the sky and the earth, and to see all things that are in it, and thus to recognize that God made them not of things that were, and that the race of men in this way comes into being. Do Don't be afraid of this butcher, but proving yourself worthy of your brothers, accept your death, that in God's mercy I receive you again with your brothers. But before she had finished speaking, the young man said, What are you all waiting for? I don't obey the commandment of the king, but I listen to the commandment of the law that was given to our fathers through Moses. But you, who have devised all kinds of evil against the Hebrews, will in no way escape God's hands, for we are suffering because of our own sins. If for rebuke and chastening our living Lord has been angered a little while, yet he will again be reconciled, with his own servants. But you, O unholy man, of all most vile, don't be vainly lifted up in your wild pride with uncertain hopes, raising your hand against the heavenly children. For you have not yet escaped the judgment of the Almighty, who sees all things. For these our brothers have endured a short pain that brings everlasting life, have now died under God's covenant. But you, through God's judgment, will receive in just measure the penalties of your arrogance. But I, as my brothers, give up both my body and soul for the laws of our fathers, calling upon God. I have to stop here for a second because, again, this is so powerful. Look at this. Look how I think about the book of Psalms, where David says that the Torah is so beautiful. It's more precious than anything this world can offer, more precious, more valuable than the finest of gold, sweeter than honey, more desirable than anything in this world. Yet Christians, for the most part, blaspheme that same Torah, saying that it's a burden, saying that it is sin, the law of sin, a ministry of death, yada, yada, yada. How horrible. How horrible. No wonder the antinomians don't want this book in their Bible. No wonder the antinomians. No wonder those lawless anomians don't want this book in their Bible. But I, as my brothers, give up both body and soul for the laws of our fathers, calling upon God that he might speedily become gracious to the nation, and that you, amidst trials and plagues, may confess that he alone is God, and that in me and my brothers you may bring to an end the wrath of the Almighty, which has been justly brought upon our whole race. But the king, falling into a rage, handled him worse than all the rest, being exasperated at his mocking. So he also died pure, putting his whole trust in the Lord. Last of all, after her sons, the mother died. Let it then suffice to have said thus concerning the sacrificial feasts and the extreme tortures. 2 Maccabees chapter 8. But Judas, who is also called Maccabeus, and those who were with him making their way secretly into the villages, called to them their kindred, taking to them those who had continued in the Jews' religion, gathered together about 6,000. They called upon the Lord to look at the people who were oppressed by all, and to have compassion on the sanctuary that had been profaned by the ungodly men, and to have pity on the city that was suffering ruin and ready to be leveled to the ground, and to listen to the blood that cried out to him, and to remember the lawless destruction of the innocent infants, and concerning the blasphemies that had been committed against his name, and to show his hatred of wickedness. Then Maccabeus had trained his men for service. The heathen at once found him irresistible, for the wrath of the Lord was turned into mercy. Coming without warning, he set fire to the cities and villages, and in winning back the most important positions, putting to flight no small number of the enemies, he especially took advantage of the nights for such assaults. His courage was loudly talked about everywhere. But when Philip saw the man gaining ground little by little and increased more and more in his success, he wrote to Ptolemy, the governor of Coelesyria and Phoenicia, that he might support the king's cause. Ptolemy quickly appointed Nicanor, the son of Patroclus, one of the king's chief friends, and sent him in command of no fewer than 20,000 of all nations to destroy the whole race of Judea. With him he joined Georges also, a captain and one who had experience in matters of war. Nicanor resolved by the sale of the captive Jews to make up for the king the tribute of 2,000 talents, which he was to pay to the Romans. Immediately he sent to the cities upon the sea coast, inviting them to buy Jewish slaves, promising to deliver 70 slaves for a talent, not expecting the judgment that was to overtake him from the Almighty. News came to Judas concerning Nicanor's invasion. When he communicated to those who were with him the presence of the army, those who were cowardly and distrustful of God's judgment ran away and left the country. Others sold all that they had left, and at the time implored the Lord to deliver those who had been sold as slaves by the impious Nicanor before he ever met them, if not for their sakes, then for the covenants with their ancestors, and because he had called them by his holy and glorious name. So Maccabeus gathered his men together, 6,000 in number, and exhorted them not to be frightened by the enemy, nor to fear the great multitude of the heathen who came wrongfully against them, but to fight nobly, setting before their eyes the outrage that had been lawlessly perpetrated upon the holy race, and the torture of the city that had been turned to mockery, and further to overthrow and further the overthrow of the way of life received from their ancestors. For they, he said, trust in their weapons and daring deeds, but we trust in the Almighty God, since he is able to, at a nod, to cast down those who are coming against us, and even the whole world. Moreover, he recounted to them the help given from time to time in the days of their ancestors, both in the days of Sennacherib, when 185,000 perished in the land of Babylon in the battle that fought against the Gauls or the Galatians, how they came to the battle with 8,000 in all, with 4,000 Macedonians, and how the Macedonians, being hard pressed, the sixth the 6,000 destroyed the 120,000 because of the help which they had from heaven, and took a great deal of plunder. And when he had with these words filled them with courage, and made them ready to die for the laws and their country, he divided his army into four parts. He appointed his brothers, Simon, Joseph, and Jonathan, to be leaders of the divisions with him, giving each the command of 1,500 men. Moreover, Eleazar, also having read aloud the sacred book, and having given as watchword the help of God, leading the first band himself, joined battle with Nicanor. Since the Almighty fought on their side, they killed more than 9,000 enemy, and wounded and disabled most of Nicanor's army, and compelled them all to flee. They took the money of those who had come there to buy them as slaves. After they had pursued them for some distance, they returned, being constrained by the time of the day, for it was the day before the Sabbath, and for this reason they made no effort to chase them far. When they had gathered the weapons of the enemy together and stripped off their spoils, they kept the Sabbath, greatly blessing and thanking the Lord, who had saved them to this day, because he had begun to show mercy to them. After the Sabbath, when they had given some of the spoils to the maimed and to the widows and orphans, they distributed the rest among themselves and their children. When they had accomplished these things and had made a common supplication, they implored the merciful Lord to be wholly reconciled with his servants. Having had an encounter with the forces of Timotheus and Bacchides, they killed more than 20,000 of them, and made themselves masters of exceedingly high strongholds, and divided very much plunder, giving the maimed, orphans, widows, and the aged an equal share with themselves. When they had gathered the weapons of the enemy together, they stored them all carefully in the most strategic positions, and they carried the rest of the spoils to Jerusalem. They carried the uh, Philarch, um, that is probably the captain of an irregular auxiliary force. Some write Philarches as a proper name. They killed the Philarch of Timotheus's forces, a most unholy man, and one who had done the Jews much harm. And they celebrated the feast of victory in the city of their fathers. They burned those who had set the sacred gates on fire, including Callisthenes, who had fled into a little house. So they received the proper reward for their impiety. The thrice accursed Nicanor, who had brought the 1,000 merchants to buy the Jews as slaves, being through the help of the Lord humbled by them who in his eyes were held to be of least account, took off his glorious apparel, and passing through the country, shunning all company like a fugitive slave, arrived at Antioch, having, as he thought, had the greatest possible good fortune, though his army was destroyed. He who had taken up himself to make tribute sure for the Romans by the captivity of the men of Jerusalem, punished abroad that the Jews had one who fought for them, and that because this was so, the Jews were invulnerable because they followed the laws ordained by him. And so that concludes our reading for tonight. See what we have here in the chat. Billy says, eye for an eye. Yes. You see, that's the way God works. So that's the way God works, to trust God that he's always on the throne. Like we're always saying here, God is always on the throne. To trust him that he'll pay the bad guys back. He'll pay them. He will ensure they get what they deserve. On the other hand, he will ensure the righteous get what they deserve as well. And so, yes, God is a just judge, and he is on the throne. Vinny says Maccabees is the reason why we are starting to celebrate Hanukkah. True, absolutely. I was thinking that very same thing, Vinny, as I was reading this. Billy says, is it possible to repent after death? According to what we read in the scriptures, especially in Luke chapter 16, especially, right? You have the rich man who died and went to eternal torment. Then we also have the Lazarus who died and went to paradise. And you see, the rich man could not repent. He wished he could, and again, when I say repent, I'm not talking about um, feeling sorry, because he felt sorry, that's for sure. I'm talking about change. I'm talking about change and change of circumstance, just like Esau. John H. Does God sleep? Answer is no. It says very clearly. Let me just pull this up. Give me a second here. Give me a second. So Psalm 121 verse 4, behold, he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. Okay. And get in the verse before that. Actually, you know what? Let's start at verse 2. My help comes from the Lord, which made heaven and earth. He will not suffer your foot to be moved. He that keeps you will not slumber. Of course, if he never slumbers, that means he never sleeps. Behold, he that keeps Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. And we have some cross references to that as well. Um, Just give me. So yeah, like First Kings 18 here, we have Elijah mocking the false gods for, saying what, like, and it came to pass at noon that Elijah mocked them and said, cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is talking, or he is pursuing, or he is in a journey, or peradventure he sleeps. In other words, perhaps he's sleeping, saying to the prophets of Baal, and must be awakened. Ecclesiastes 8:16, when I applied my heart to know wisdom and to see the business that is done upon the earth, for also there is that neither day nor night seeth sleep with his eyes. Okay. Yes. Jesus sleep, we read in the gospels that he did. Yes, he did. Okay, so last call. Anybody else with any questions? Please put that in the live chat. We'll get to that. In the meantime, we again very very pleased to announce that um, we have a special guest with us. Excuse me, August 7th at Sunday, August 7th at 1 p.m. Lord willing. So we have Dr. Tabor with us, and that's going to be an awesome and a very exciting time, as he is a prolific Bible scholar and archaeologist as well. So amazing man, amazing gentleman that we're going to have on here. So let your friends know, and and uh, and so yeah, let your friends know that we have this particular um, Bible scholar with us. So this won't be this Sunday, but next Sunday. All right. All right. Okay. So that's it for tonight. We'll wrap it up for tonight. Again, tomorrow evening, that is at 7 p.m., we will have we'll be back, same time, same place. We will do finish up what we started here. We're going to be reading Second Maccabees chapters 9, 10, 11, and 12. And so that's what we're going to be doing. I see we got one more question. I'll just answer this one more question before we go. So John says, what is the worst sin in God's eyes? That's a very good question. Uh, a lot of Christians would say that all sin is equal, which it is certainly not. We know that all sin is not equal because uh, there are different punishments, different levels, different degrees of punishments for different sins. We know in 1 John chapter 3, verse 4, that sin is defined as transgression of the law. So if you break God's law, you sin, right? You sin against God. And so if you break God's law, um, you will be punished one way or another. And so in God's law, it gives you different punishments, right? It tells you different punishments for different sins. We have some sins that are hardly punished at all, if you know what I mean. Hardly punished. Sometimes just a monetary fine, sometimes just a little bit, not much. And we have other sins that are punished with death, according to the Torah in the scriptures. Okay, so that goes to show us that there is there are many different levels. There are many different levels of sin. We know Jesus said of Judas that he created, or he Judas committed the greater sin. So we know that there are greater sins, which obviously means there are lesser sins. Um, don't let anybody tell you that all sin is equal. It's not. It's not, because there are greater commandments, there are greater sins. There are lesser commandments, there are lesser sins. I cannot give you an enumerated list on what are the worst sins. Now, the worst sin is hard to point out. It's hard to say. Okay. I know what some Christians would say, but they make up their own laws. They make up their own. They make up their own Torah, and that's what they do, which is not in the Torah. I would say this: any sin that is in the Torah punishable by death is one of the greatest sins you can ever commit. Not every sin is an abomination either. It says that, we have in the Torah, we have some sins that are, it doesn't really say a whole lot about it. Other sins are called abominations. And so, yes, we have worse sins and less sins. This would take a huge study to get into all the different sins and all that kind of thing. I would just say, just if it's something that's in your life, I would pray, ask God, if it's something that's an abomination. If it's an abomination, do everything you possibly can do to get it out, regardless of the fact. Even if it's the least of all the sins, do whatever you can do to get it out of your life. Jesus said, "He who teaches other men to disobey even the least of the commandments will be called least in the kingdom of heaven." That doesn't even mean that they're going to even be in heaven. It just means the people in heaven are going to call them the least. And you see, that's what happens with the church as well. The church tells you basically it's okay to violate God's laws. It's okay, and they use their interpretation of Paul's letters for the most part to support that. But that's a horrible thing. It's a horrible thing, because these people who make other people believe that it's okay to sin, even in the least way, Jesus had nothing good to say about it. It says, if you obey the commandments and you teach others to obey the commandments, you'll be called the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So, hey, that's the idea, to obey God, not to be like Satan, not to be like the devil and disobey God, but to be like the Lord. WWJD, what would Jesus do? To answer that question specifically, it's almost impossible, because it depends on how you classify sins. But you can't really point to one specific commandment. You can say that to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. To not love the Lord your God is like the greatest sin. But what does that mean? That's defined by the other commandments. Thank you, John. Great question. Thank you for asking. Awesome question. Thanks, John. Hope to see you all again tomorrow night. Tomorrow we'll do this again, Lord willing, same time, same place, 7 p.m. Eastern, and we'll pick up where we left off. And yes, this is going right into the Hanukkah story. It's awesome, absolutely amazing. Billy says, "Thanks, Christopher, Hannah, and everyone here. God bless. Thank you very much, Billy." The Great Deception says, "Thank you, brother. Much love and blessings to you all." Thank you, Alan. Love and blessings multiplied back to you. Vinny says, "Thank you, Christopher. Many blessings to everyone. Shalom. Thank you very much, Vinny. Blessings multiplied back to you, brother." Psalm 94 says, I think blasphemy of the Holy Spirit is a big one in sexual sins as well. I would think sexual sins certainly are at the top. For sure. Absolutely. Blessings to all. Thank you very much. Blessings multiplied back to you. Okay. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Love you guys. Blessings. And you guys are awesome. Don't forget, you guys are world changers. As always, I pray the Lord bless you and keep you and make his face to shine upon you, lift up his countenance upon you, and give you wonderful, wonderful shalom. Amen, amen. See you tomorrow.